Sometimes fate plays cruel tricks on us, turning our greatest loss into the greatest discovery of our lives. Billy Thompson always believed that he knew every inch of his land, every broken fence, every dry well, every animal that grazed under the harsh Arizona sun. Their farm stretched across miles of red, parched land where Hereford cattle tried to find scant shade among the thorny cacti. He was a practical man, of few words and hands calloused by hard work. He never married. He never had time for that. The farm consumed every minute of its days, from sunrise to sunset. The trouble began when creditors showed up at his door one morning in July. 3 men in black suits, sweating under the relentless heat, carrying papers that sealed Billy's fate. The debts accumulated during the years of prolonged drought had grown like weeds after the rain. They didn't just want the money, they wanted the whole farm. But Judge Cornelius Whitmore had other plans. A burly man with a grey mustache and a dubious reputation, Whitmore had known Billy since he was a boy. He also knew Helena Mackenzie, the widow who had lived alone on the neighboring property since her husband died in an accident with wild horses 3 years earlier. The proposal sounded like a sentence. Billy could keep his farm, but only if he agreed to marry Helena within a week. It was a matter of uniting the properties, according to Whitmore, a practical solution to 2 problems. Billy would get his land, and Helena would have protection and sustenance. No one asked what they wanted. Billy had seen Helena only a few times over the years, always from afar, always in a hurry, always avoiding looks. The townspeople spoke of her in whispers. They said it was strange that she talked to herself, that the animals behaved bizarrely around her. Some even whispered about witchcraft, though no one dared to say it out loud. In fact, no one really knew her. Helena had remained isolated since her husband's death, appearing in the city only when absolutely necessary. He would buy supplies quickly and disappear back to his small property. His clothes were simple and worn, her hair always carelessly tied up, his eyes always downcast. The city considered her ugly, not out of malice, but out of ignorance. For them, beauty meant the colorful dresses and forced smiles of other women. Helena did not fit these standards. She was different. And in the West, different often meant dangerous. Billy spent 3 sleepless nights after receiving the news. He walked along the porch of his house, observing his land under the moonlight. The cattle mooed softly in the distance. His horses occasionally neighed in the stables. These sounds have always brought peace to his heart. Now, they only intensified their anguish. He didn't want to get married, especially not like that, forced, as a business transaction. But the alternative was to lose everything he had worked for all his life. The farm was not just his home, it was his identity, your purpose, your only family. On the 4th night, Billy finally made his decision. He mounted his brown horse and rode to Helena's property. The full moon illuminated the dusty path, creating dancing shadows among the dry bushes. The night wind carried the aroma of sage and parched earth. Helena's house was smaller than his, a simple wooden construction with a small balcony at the front. There were no lights on, but Billy could hear strange sounds coming from the back of the property. They were not the typical sounds of a farm. There was something different, something that made his horse hesitate and his ears bristle nervously. Billy dismounted and tied the reins to the fence post. His footsteps rang too loud in the silence of the night as he made his way to the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened. Helena was standing on the doorstep, as if she knew he was coming. His eyes showed no surprise at seeing him there, only a quiet resignation that Billy recognized immediately. It was the same look he had been carrying for the past few days. She was shorter than he remembered. Her dark hair was loose, falling over her shoulders in a natural way. In the moonlight, Billy realized that Helena was not ugly as people said. It was just neglected, like a flower that grows carelessly but still retains its natural essence. Billy took off his hat and held it to his chest. The words he had rehearsed during the ride were lost in his throat. Helena watched him with a patience that seemed infinite. as if she was used to waiting for others to find the courage to speak. She nodded, an almost imperceptible gesture. I didn't need to hear the words to understand why he was there. News of the forced marriage had already reached her through the same men in suits who had visited Billy. Helena walked away from the door, a silent invitation for him to come in. The interior of the house was surprisingly welcoming. Simple but well-kept furniture occupied the small space. The aroma of dried herbs hung in the air. On the kitchen table, Billy noticed several bottles with substances he could not identify. It was then that he heard again the strange sounds coming from the back of the house. Helena noticed his interest and walked towards the back door. Billy followed her, his curiosity overcoming the awkwardness of the situation. The backyard revealed something Billy could never have imagined. Dozens of animals moved freely through the fenced space, not just domestic animals. There were injured coyotes resting next to chickens. A young deer was drinking water from a trough next to some goats. Birds of different species perched on makeshift perches, some with bandaged wings. Billy stood still, trying to process what he saw. These were animals that would normally attack each other. Predators and prey sharing the same space in absolute harmony. It was impossible. It contradicted everything he knew about nature. Helena approached a grey wolf that was lying near the fence. The animal showed no fear or aggression. On the contrary, he tilted his head when she reached out, allowing him to caress her snout. Billy noticed that the wolf's left hind leg was bandaged. She moved among the animals with a naturalness that fascinated Billy. Each creature reacted to his presence with tranquility. Some approached her. Others simply continued their activities, but all seemed to recognize something special in Helena. A wild horse with black fur and a shaggy mane approached the fence where Billy was standing. The animal had deep scars on its chest and neck. Billy recognized the signs of a cougar attack. By the size of the marks, it had been a recent and brutal attack. Helena approached the horse, extending her hand slowly. The animal, which should have been terrified by the presence of humans after such traumatization, tilted its head and allowed it to touch its neck. Billy watched as Helena examined the wounds carefully, her fingers tracing the edges of the scars with a delicacy that seemed almost otherworldly. What impressed Billy most was not only the calmness of the animals, but the expression on Helena's face. For the first time since he had known her, she seemed truly at peace. His eyes shone with a light he had never noticed before. Here, among these wounded creatures, she was not the strange widow that people whispered about. He was someone completely different. Billy began to understand why she kept herself isolated from the city. This place was his sanctuary. These animals were his true family, and he was about to invade this delicate world with a marriage that neither of them wanted. Helena stared at him for a moment, as if she could read his thoughts. So, he did something that completely surprised Billy. She smiled. It wasn't a forced or polite smile. It was genuine, sad, but genuine. At that moment, Billy realized that Helena was also making a sacrifice. She wasn't just accepting an unwanted husband. She was risking exposing her most precious secret to a stranger who might not understand, or even worse, who might report her to the authorities. The night wind brought with it the distant sound of coyotes howling in the mountains. The animals in Helena's backyard showed no nervousness. They continued their peaceful activities as if they knew they were protected there. Billy finally found his voice, though it was only a hoarse whisper. He asked her how she managed to do that, how he was able to heal wild creatures and keep them at peace with each other. Helena did not answer with words. Instead, he walked to a small wooden building that Billy hadn't noticed before. It was a kind of improvised workshop or laboratory. The walls were covered with dry herbs hanging from ropes. Shelves contained vials of different sizes, each labeled with delicate handwriting. She took one of the bottles and showed it to Billy. Inside was a golden liquid that seemed to glow even in the dim light of the moon. Helena gestured, indicating the injured animals and then the bottle, explaining without words that this substance was part of the healing process. Billy took a closer look at the workshop. There were instruments that he did not recognize, but that were clearly used to prepare medicines. Old books were piled up on a small table. Detailed drawings of plants and animals covered an entire wall. This woman, whom the city considered strange and dangerous, was in fact a healer. A person with knowledge and skills that could benefit the entire region, but who kept himself hidden for fear of misunderstanding and persecution. The wedding took place 3 days later in a quick and silent ceremony at the city's registry office. Billy wore his only clean suit. Helena wore a simple blue dress that belonged to her mother. Justice Whitmore presided over the ceremony with a satisfied smile, as if he were resolving 2 problems with a single signature. There was no party. There were no guests other than the obligatory witnesses. Billy and Helena returned to their respective properties the same day, maintaining the facade of a marriage of convenience that satisfied creditors and local authorities. But Billy couldn't forget what he had seen in Helena's backyard. Over the next few days, as he tended his cattle and repaired broken fences, his thoughts constantly returned to that impossible scene. Wild animals living in harmony, wounded creatures being healed by methods he had never witnessed. A week after the wedding, Billy found 3 of his cows in a worrisome state. A mysterious disease had spread rapidly through the herd. The animals refused food and water, their breaths were laborious, and a whitish layer covered their eyes. Billy had seen this condition before. It usually meant certain death within a few days. The nearest veterinarian was 2 days away from riding. Even if Billy left immediately, he would likely lose at least half the herd. The farm he had fought so hard to maintain was about to become useless. It was then that Billy remembered Helena and her mysterious jars. He mounted his horse and rode to her property as the sun was beginning to set. This time, Helena was not waiting at the door. Billy found her in the back of the house, tending to a fox cub with a broken hind leg. She had created a makeshift splint, using thin branches and strips of fabric. Billy explained the situation of his cattle, watching as Helena processed the information. She showed no surprise or hesitation. He simply nodded and walked to his makeshift workshop. Helena selected several different bottles, each containing substances of varying colors and textures. She also took a leather bag containing instruments that Billy could not identify. His movements were precise and confident, like those of someone who had done it many times before. They rode together to Billy's farm when the moon was already high in the sky. Helena rode a bay horse that moved with almost silent smoothness. Billy noticed that other animals were following them in the distance for part of the journey. 2 coyotes, a deer, and several nocturnal birds stood nearby, as if they were a natural escort. When they arrived at the farm, Helena dismounted and immediately approached the sick cows. She showed no fear or repulsion, even when the animals were clearly suffering. His hands examined each cow carefully, touching its snouts, checking its temperatures, observing its reactions. Billy watched in fascination as Helena prepared a concoction using 3 of the jars he had brought. The resulting liquid had a grayish-green color and a strong aroma reminiscent of pine and something else he couldn't identify. Helena administered the drug to each cow individually, gently forcing them to swallow small amounts. His patience was infinite. When an animal resisted, she waited until she found the right moment. He never forced it. He never used violence. After treating all the sick cows, Helena headed for the rest of the herd. Billy thought she would leave, but she began to examine animals that seemed perfectly healthy. His hands ran over the bodies of the cattle with a precision that suggested years of experience. In 2 apparently normal animals, Helena found early signs of the same disease, symptoms so subtle that Billy would never have noticed. She treated them immediately, preventing the condition from spreading further into the herd. The work lasted all night. Helena moved among the animals with an energy that seemed inexhaustible. Billy tried to help, but quickly realized that his presence sometimes made the animals nervous. Helena, on the other hand, had an immediate calming effect on any creature that approached her. When the sun rose, Helena had tended more than 40 head of cattle. His clothes were soiled with dirt and animal hair, but his expression remained serene. Billy had never seen anyone work with such dedication and competence. The cows that had seemed on the verge of death the night before were now on their feet, drinking water and showing interest in food. The whitish substance had completely disappeared from his eyes. His breaths returned to normal. Billy was speechless. In a single night, Helena had saved her farm and consequently her entire life. She had done something he considered impossible, using knowledge and skills that challenged everything he believed he knew about veterinary medicine. Helena was preparing to leave when Billy finally found the courage to speak. He asked her where she had learned those techniques, how he knew so much about animal healing, because he kept everything a secret. For the first time, Helena spoke more than a few words. His voice was soft but firm. She said she had learned from her grandmother, a Cherokee woman who had settled in the region decades earlier. The knowledge had been passed down from generation to generation, a mixture of traditional, indigenous medicine with techniques learned through years of observation and experimentation. She explained that she kept it a secret because she knew how people would react. I had seen other healers being persecuted, expelled, or worse. Ignorance and fear turned gifts into curses in the eyes of those who did not understand. Billy realized at that moment that Helena was not just his wife in the role. She was a partner who could completely transform the future of her farm. Together they could create something special, a property where animals not only survived, but thrived under specialized care. But first, he needed to gain her trust completely. And Helena had to decide if she was willing to risk exposing her secrets even more for a marriage that had begun as an imposition. 3 months have passed since that transformative night when Helena saved Billy's flock. What began as a forced marriage had become something neither of them expected, a true partnership. Helena moved to Billy's farm, bringing with her her injured animals and all her medicinal knowledge. They built a special space at the back of the property, a fenced-in area where she could continue her healing work without interfering with the normal operations of the farm. Billy learned to observe animals with new eyes. Helena taught him to identify early signs of disease, to recognize behaviors that indicated health problems, and to prepare basic remedies using plants found on the land itself. His farm began to prosper in a way he had never imagined. Billy's cattle became the healthiest in the entire region. Other farmers began to notice the difference. Visitors arrived regularly, curious to discover the secret behind the Thompson estate's sudden success. At first, Billy and Helena were careful. They explained success through conventional methods, better nutrition, care with water, attention to detail, but it was impossible to completely hide what Helena could do. The first outsider to find out the truth was Samuel Rodriguez, a neighboring farmer who had lost 3 valuable horses due to a mysterious illness. Samuel arrived at Billy's farm one September morning, desperate and willing to try anything to save his remaining animals. Helena examined Samuel's horses and immediately identified the condition. It was a rare infection that attacked the respiratory system, often fatal if not treated properly. She prepared a specific treatment and administered it to the animals, while Samuel watched with growing skepticism that turned to admiration. Within 3 days, Samuel's horses were completely recovered. The news spread quickly among the farmers in the region, but in a different way than Helena feared. Instead of suspicion and fear, she found gratitude and respect. Billy realized that Helena had gained something he had always secretly wanted, recognition for her gifts. Farmers traveled miles to seek his help. She treated horses, cattle, sheep, and even pets from the city's families. With each successful healing, Helena's reputation grew, but more importantly, his confidence also grew. She no longer had to hide or feel ashamed of her abilities. Billy was completely supportive, proud to have a wife with such exceptional talents. The transformation in Helena's appearance was remarkable. Her hair, now well-groomed, glistened in the Arizona sun. His clothes, though simple, were clean and well-fitting. But the most striking change was in his eyes. Sadness and fear had been replaced by a serene confidence. Billy has also changed. The lonely, work-focused man found that having a true partner made each day more meaningful. He learned to cherish moments of tranquility with Helena, watching her work with the animals or simply sharing meals in comfortable silence. In the winter, they faced their first big challenge together. A severe snowstorm hit the region, trapping both domestic and wild animals without adequate shelter. The Thompson farm has become a makeshift refuge for dozens of creatures. Helena worked tirelessly during the colder days, treating cases of hypothermia, frost injuries, and lack of nutrition. Billy built temporary shelters and helped transport injured animals. Together, they saved more lives that winter than many professional veterinarians could manage in an entire year. The local community began to see Helena with different eyes. The women of the city, who had previously whispered about her strangeness, now came to her for advice on pet care. The children were fascinated when she explained about different medicinal plants. Billy noticed how Helena flourished with this acceptance. She smiled more often. He spoke with more confidence. He moved around the city without trying to hide or avoid eye contact. The following spring, Billy made a decision that surprised even Helena. He suggested that they make her work official, creating a natural veterinary clinic on the property. Helena could serve animals from all over the region, charging fair prices for her services. The idea scared Helena at first. She was used to working in secret, to keeping her methods away from prying eyes, but Billy convinced her that the world had changed. People were willing to accept alternative methods if the results were proven effective. They built a small clinic on the east side of the property. Billy used his construction skills to create a functional and welcoming space. Helena organized her medications and instruments in a professional manner. They put a simple sign at the entrance: Thompson Veterinary Clinic, Natural Treatments. The first few months were challenging. Some traditional veterinarians in the region saw Helena as unfair competition. Local officials questioned his formal qualifications, but the results spoke for themselves. Animals that other professionals had declared lost cases recovered completely under Helena's care. Billy became his wife's biggest supporter. He documented each success story, kept detailed records of treatments and outcomes, and gradually built up an impressive archive that proved the effectiveness of Helena's methods. A year after the clinic began, an event changed everything definitively. Judge Whitmore's son, a 10-year-old boy named Thomas, was in a serious accident while riding a young horse. The boy broke several ribs and suffered internal injuries that the city's doctors could not properly treat. Whitmore, the same man who had forced Billy and Helena into marriage, sought out Helena in desperation. She examined the boy carefully and identified internal bleeding that was being missed by conventional doctors. Helena prepared a complex treatment that included herbs to control bleeding and accelerate internal healing. Thomas made a full recovery within 2 weeks. Whitmore, a proud and stubborn man, publicly admitted that Helena had saved his son's life. From that moment on, no local authority questioned Helena's qualifications or methods anymore. The clinic has thrived beyond all expectations. Farmers traveled from neighboring states to seek Helena's care. She began training local assistants, sharing some of her knowledge with people who showed genuine interest and aptitude. Billy expanded the farm to accommodate the growing demand for his services. They purchased adjacent land and built larger, more modern facilities. The Thompson estate has become a landmark in the region, known as much for the quality of its cattle and the excellence of its veterinary clinic. But the most important thing for Billy and Helena was what they had discovered in each other: Forced marriage had turned into a union based on mutual respect, admiration, and eventually a deep, genuine love. Helena was no longer the strange widow that people feared. She was a respected healer, a devoted wife, and a woman who had found her place in the world. Billy was no longer a lone farmer struggling to make ends meet. He was a man who had discovered that sharing life with someone special multiplied both successes and happiness. On summer evenings, they used to sit on the porch of the house, watching the movement of the animals in the fields. Helena sometimes hummed Cherokee melodies that she learned from her grandmother. Billy played the harmonica, creating simple harmonies that blended with the natural sounds of the farm. Fate had played a trick on the two of them, forcing them into a marriage that neither wanted. But that same footprint of fate turned out to be the greatest blessing of their lives. Billy discovered that his ugly wife was actually an extraordinary woman, gifted with rare talents and a compassionate soul. Helena discovered that the lone farmer was a man capable of accepting and supporting his unique gifts. 5 years after the forced marriage, the Thompson farm was thriving beyond any previous dream. Helena's clinic served hundreds of animals a month. Billy expanded the herd and diversified production. Together, they created not only a successful business, but a legacy of care and compassion that benefited the entire community. And whenever Billy looked at Helena working with some injured animal, using his natural gifts to heal and comfort, he would remember that first night when she saved her cattle. At that moment, he had thought she was saving his farm. Now he understood that she had saved much more than that. She had saved his soul, his capacity to love, and his faith in the unexpected goodness that sometimes comes from life's most difficult moments. The Arizona sun was as inclement as ever, but for Billy and Helena Thompson, each new day held the promise of more healing, more successes, and more moments of shared happiness in a partnership that had surpassed all the expectations and prejudices of an entire community. If you enjoyed this heartwarming Wild West story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing storytelling like this one.